Good wishes to all of you. Textbook in history for class 11. Themes in world history. Theme 4. The Central Islamic Lands Audiobook. As we enter the 21st century, there are over 1 billion Muslims living in all parts of the world. They are citizens of different nations, speak different languages, and dress differently. The process by which they became Muslims were varied, and so were the circumstances in which they went their separate ways. Yet, the Islamic community has its roots in a more unified past which unfolded roughly 1400 years ago in the Arabian Peninsula. In this chapter, we are going to read about the rise of Islam and its expansion over a vast territory extending from Egypt to Afghanistan, the core area of Islamic civilization from 600 to 1200. In these centuries, Islamic society exhibited exhibited multiple political and cultural patterns. The term Islamic is used here not only in its purely religious sense but also for the overall society and culture historically associated with Islam. In this society, not everything that was happening originated directly from regional, but it took place in a society where Muslims and their faith were recognized as socially dominant. Non Muslims always formed an integral, if subordinate, parts of this society, as did Jews in Christendom. Our understanding of the history of the Central Islamic land between 600 and 1200 is based on chronicles or Tawarik, which narrates events in order of time, and semi-historical works such as biographies, Sirah, records of the sayings and doings of the Prophet, Hadith, and commentaries on the Quran, Tafsir. The material from which these works were produced was a large collection of eyewitness reports. Akbar transmitted over a period of time either orally or on paper. The authenticity of each report, Khabhar, was tested by a critical method which traced the chain of transmission isnad and established the reliability of the narrator. Although the method was not foolproof, medieval Muslim writers were more careful in selecting their information and understanding the motives of their informants than were their contemporaries in other parts of the world on controversial issues. They reproduced different versions of the same event as they found in their sources, leaving the task of judgment of their readers. Their description of events closer to their own times is more systematic and analytic and less of a collection of Akbar. Most of the chronics and semi-historical works are in Arabic, the best being the Tariq of Tabari 923, which has been translated into English in 38 volumes. Persian chronics are few, but they are quite detailed in their treatment of Iran and Central Asia. Christian chronics, written in Syriac, a dialect of Aramaic, are fewer, but they throw interesting light on the history of early Islam. Besides chronics, we have legal texts, geographies, travelogues, and literary works such as stories and poems. Documented evidence, fragmentary pieces of writing such as official orders or private correspondence is the most valuable for writing histories because it does not consciously refer to events and persons. It comes almost entirely from Greek and Arabic papyri, good for administrative history, and the Janija records. Some evidence has emerged from archaeological excavations done at desert palaces, numismatic study of coins, and epigraphic study of inscription sources, which is of great value for economic history, art history, and for establishing names and dates. Proper histories of Islam began to be written in the 19th century by university professors in Germany and the Netherlands. Colonial interest in the Middle East and North Africa encouraged French and British researchers to study Islam as well. Christian priests too paid close attention to the history of Islam and produced some good work. Although their interest was mainly to compare Islam with Christianity, these scholars called Orientalists are known for their knowledge of Arabic and Persian and critical analysis of original texts. Ignaz Godzier was a Hungarian Jew who studied at the Islamic College Al Azhar in Cairo and produced path breaking studies in German of Islamic law and theology. 20th century historians of Islam have largely followed the interests and methods of Orientalists. They have widened the scope of Islamic history by including new topics and by using elite disciplines such as economics, anthropology, and statistics have refined many aspects of Orientalist studies. The historiography of Islam is a good example of how religion can be studied with modern historical methods by those who may not share the customs and beliefs of the people they are studying. Aramaic is a language related to Hebrew and Arabic. It has also been used in Ashokan inscriptions. The rise of Islam in Arabia, faith, community, and politics. During 612 to 32, the Prophet Muhammad preached the worship of a single God, Allah, and the membership of a single community of believers, Ummah. This was the origin of Islam. Muhammad was an Arab by language and culture and a merchant by profession. 6th century Arab culture was largely confined to the Arabian Peninsula and areas of southern Syria and Mesopotamia. The Arabs were divided into tribes, Qibla, each led by a chief who was chosen partly on the basis of his family connections but more for his personal courage, wisdom, and generosity. Murwa, each tribe had its own god and goddess who was worshipped as an idol, Sanam. In a shrine, many Arab tribes were nomadic Bedouins moving from dry to green areas, oases of the desert in search of food, mainly dates and fodder for their camels. Some settled in cities and practiced, practiced trade or agriculture. Muhammad's own tribe, Quraysh, lived in Mecca and controlled the main shrine there, a cube-like structure called Kaaba, in which idols were placed. Even tribes outside Mecca considered the Kaaba holy and installed their own idols at this shrine, making annual pilgrimages Hajj to the shrine. Mecca was located on the crossroads of a trade route between Yemen and Syria, which further enhanced the city's importance. See map page 82. The Mecca shrine was a sanctuary haram where violence was forbidden and protection given to all visitors. Pilgrimage and commerce gave the nomadic and settled tribes opportunities to communication with one another and share their beliefs and customs. Although the polytheistic Arabs were vaguely familiar with the notion of a supreme God, Allah, possibly under the influence of the Jewish and Christian tribes living in their midst. Their attachment to idols and shrines was more immediate and stronger. Around 612, Muhammad declared himself to be the messenger Rasul of God who had been commanded to preach that Allah alone should be worshipped. The worship involved simple rituals such as daily prayers, salat, and moral principles such as distributing alms and abstaining from theft. Muhammad was to found a community of believers, Ummah, bound by a common set of religious beliefs. The community would bear witness shahada to the existence of the religion before God as well as before members of other religious communities. Muhammad's message particularly appealed to those Meccans who felt deprived of the gains from trade and religion and were looking for a new community identity. Those who accepted the doctrine were called Muslims. They were promised salvation on the day of judgment, Qiyamah, and a share of the resources of the community while on earth. The Muslims soon faced considerable oppo- opposition from affluent Meccans who took offense to the rejection of their deities and found the new religion a threat to the status and prosperity of Mecca. In 622, Muhammad was forced to migrate with his followers to Medina. Muhammad's journey from Mecca, Hijrah, was a turning point in the history of Islam, with the year of his arrival in Medina marking the beginning of the Muslim calendar. Tribes are societies organized on the basis of blood relationships. The Arab tribes were made up of clans or combinations of large families. Unrelated clans also merged to make a tribe stronger. Non-Arab individuals, Mawali, became members through the patronage of prominent tribesmen. Even after converting to Islam, the Mawali were never treated as equals by the Arab Muslims and had to pray in separate mosques. A 13th century painting from Ajaibul Makulat, depicting the artisan imagination of the Archangel Gabriel Jibril, who brought messages to Muhammad. The first word he spoke was recite Iqra, from which has come the word Quran. In Islamic cosmology, angels are one of the three intelligent forms of life in the universe. The other two are human and jinns. Islamic calendar. The Hijra era was established during the Caliphate of Umar, with the first year falling in 622 CE. A date in the Hijri calendar is followed by the letters AH. The Hijri year is a lunar year of 354 days, 12 months, Muharram to Jul Hijjah of 29 or 30 days. Each day begins at sunset and each month with the setting of the crescent moon. The Hijri year is about 11 days shorter than the solar year. Therefore, none of the Islamic religious festivals, including the Ramzan fast, Eid, and Hajj, corresponds in any way to seasons. There is no easy way to match the dates in the Hijri calendar with the dates in the Gregorian calendar established by Pope Gregory XIII in 1582 CE. One can calculate the rough equivalence between the Islamic Hajj and Gregorian Christian C years with the following formula: H into 32 by 33 plus 622 is equal to C. C minus 622 into 33 by 32 is equal to H. Take a look at this painting. Pilgrims at the Kaaba, illustration from the 15th century Persian manuscript. The survival of a religion rests on the survival of the community of believers. The community has to be consolidated internally and protected from external dangers. Consolidation and protection require political instructions such as states and governments, which are either inherited from the past, borrowed from outside, or created from scratch. In Medina, Muhammad created a political order from all three sources, which gave his followers the protection they needed as well as resolved the city's ongoing civil strife. The Ummah was converted into a wider community to include polytheists and the Jews of Medina under the political leadership of Muhammad. Muhammad consolidated the faith for his followers by adding and refining rituals such as fasting and ethical principles. The community survived on agriculture and trade, as well as an alms tax, zakat. In addition, the Muslims organized expeditionary raids to Meccan caravans and nearby oases. These raids provoked reactions from the Meccan and Khazraj bridge with the Jews of Medina. After a series of battles, Mecca was conquered and Muhammad's reputation as a religious preacher and political leader spread far and wide. Muhammad now insisted on conversion as the sole criterion for membership of the community in the harsh conditions of the desert. The Arab attached great value to strength and solidarity. Impressed by Muhammad's achievements, many tribes, mostly Bedouins, joined the community by converting to Islam. Muhammad's alliances began to spread until they embraced the whole of Arabia. Medina became the administrative capital of the emerging Islamic state with Mecca as its religious center. The Kaaba was cleansed of idols as Muslims were required to face the shrine when offering prayers. In a short space of time, Muhammad was able to unite a large part of Arabia under a new faith, community, and state. The early Islamic polity, however, remained a federation of Arab tribes and clans for a long time. The caliphate expansion, civil wars, and sect formation. After Muhammad's death in 632, no one could legitimately claim to be the next prophet of Islam. As a result, his political authority was transferred to the Ummah with no established principle of succession. This created opportunities for innovations but also caused deep divisions among the Muslims. The biggest innovations was the creation of the institution of caliphate, in which the leader of the community, Amir al-Mu'minin, became the deputy Khalifa of the Prophet. The first four caliphs 632 to 61 justified their powers on the basis of their close associations with the Prophet and continued his work under the general guidance he had provided. The twin objects of the caliphate were to retain control over the tribes constituting the Ummah and to raise resources for the state. Following Muhammad's death, many tribes broke away from the Islamic State. Some even raised their own prophets to establish communities modeled on the Ummah. The first Caliph, Abu Bakr, suppressed the revolts by a series of campaigns. The second Caliph, Umar, shaped the Ummah's policy of expansion of power. The Caliph knew that the Ummah could not be maintained out of the modest income derived from trade and taxes. Realizing that rich booty, Ghanima, could be obtained from expeditionary raids, the Caliph and his military commanders mustered their tribal strength to conquer lands belonging to the Byzantine Empire in the west and the Sasanian Empire in the east. At the height of their power, the Byzantine and Sasanian empires ruled vast territories and commanded huge resources to pursue their political and commercial interests in Arabia. The Byzantine Empire promoted Christianity and the Sasanian Empire patronized Zoroastrianism, the ancient religion of Iran. On the eve of the Arab invasion, these two empires had declined in strength due to religious conflict and revolts by the aristocracy. This made it easier for the Arabs to annex territories through wars and treaties in three successful campaigns 637 to 642. The Arabs brought Syria, Iraq, Iran, and Egypt under the control of Medina. Military strategy, religious fervor, and the weakness of the opposition contributed to the success of the Arabs. Further campaigns were launched by the third Caliph Uthman to extend the control of Central Asia. Within a decade of the death of Muhammad, the Arab Islamic State controlled the vast territory between the Nile and the Oxus. These lands remain under Muslim rule to this day. In all the conquered provinces, the caliphs imposed a new administrative structure headed by governors, emirs, the tribal chieftains, Ashraf. The central treasury, Bait al-Mal, obtained its revenue from taxes paid by Muslims as well as its share of the booty from raids. The Caliph soldiers, mostly Bedouins, settled in camp cities at the edge of the desert, such as Kufa and Basra, to remain within reach of their natural habits as well as the Caliph's command. The ruling class and soldiers received shares of the booty and monthly payments at her. The non-Muslim population retained their rights to property and religious practices on payment of taxes, qaras and jizya. Jews and Christians were declared protected subjects of the state, dhimmis, and given a large measure of autonomy in the conduct of their communal affairs. Political expansions and unification did not come easily to the Arab tribesmen. With the territorial expansion, the unity of the Ummah became threatened by conflicts over the distribution of resources and offices. The ruling class of the early Islamic State comprised almost entirely the Quraysh of Mecca. The third Caliph Uthman 644 to 56 also a Quraysh packed his administration with his own men to secure greater control. This further intensified the Meccan character of the state, and the conflict with the other tribesmen. Opposition in Iraq and Egypt, combined with opposition in Medina, led to the assassination of Uthman. With Uthman's death, Ali became the fourth caliph. The rifts among the Muslims deepened after Ali 656 to 61 fought two wars against those who represented the Meccan aristocracy. Ali established himself at Kufa and defeated an army led by Muhammad's wife Aisha. In the Battle of the Camel 657, he was however not able to suppress the faction led by Muawiyah, a kinsman of Uthman and the governor of Syria. Ali's second battle at Siffin, northern Mesopotamia, ended in a truce which split his followers into two groups. Some remained loyal to him, while others left the campaign and came to be known as Qadjis. Soon after, Ali was assassinated by a Qadji in a mosque at Kufa. After his death, his followers paid allegiance to his son Hussein and his descendants. Muawiyah made himself the next caliph in 661, founding the Umayyad dynasty, which lasted till 750. After the civil wars, it appears as if Arab domination would disintegrate. There were also signs that the tribal conquerors were adopting the sophisticated culture of their subjects. It was under the Umayyads, a prosperous clan of the Quraysh tribe, that a second round of consolidation took place. The Umayyads and the centralization of polity. The conquest of large territories destroyed the caliphate based in Medina and replaced it with an increasingly authoritarian polity. The Umayyads implemented a series of political measures which consolidated their leadership within the Ummah. The first Umayyad Caliph Muawiyah moved his capital to Damascus and adopted the court ceremonies and administrative instructions of the Byzantine Empire. He also introduced hereditary successions and persuaded the leading Muslims to accept his son as his heir. These innovations were adopted by the caliphs who followed him and allowed the Umayyads to retain power for 90 years and the Abbasids for 2 centuries. The Umayyad state was now an imperial power, no longer based directly on Islam but on statecraft and the loyalty of Syrian troops. There were Christian advisors in the administration as well as Zoroastrian scribes and bureaucrats. However, Islam continued to provide legitimacy to their ruler, the Umayyads always appealed for unity and suppressed rebellions in the name of Islam. They also identity during the reign of Abd al-Malik 685 to 705 and his successors, both the Arab and Islamic identities were strongly emphasized. Among the measures, Abd al-Malik Arabic as the language of introduction of an Islamic coinage, the gold dinar and silver dirham that had been circulating in the Caliphate were copies of Byzantine and Iranian coins, denarius and drachm, with symbols of crosses and fire altars, and Greek and Pahlavi, the language of Iran inscriptions. These symbols were removed and the coins now carried Arabic inscriptions. Abd al-Malik also made a highly visible contribution to the development of an Arab Islamic identity by building the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem. The Dome of the Rock, built over a rocky mount by Abd al-Malik, it is the earliest major work of Islamic architecture. Created as a monument to the Muslim presence in the city of Jerusalem, it acquired a mystical association connected with the night journey of the Prophet to heaven, Miraj. Byzantine gold solidus denarius aureus showing the emperor Heraclius and his two sons. Portrait gold dinar struck by Abd al-Malik with his name and image. The reformer dinar was purely epigraphic. It carries the kalima, there is no God but Allah and he has no partner, Sharik. Abd al-Malik's coin is reform. The three coin specimens show the transition from Byzantine to Arab Islamic coinage. On the second coin, the beard and long-haired caliph is dressed in traditional Arab robes and he is holding a sword. It is the first extant portrait of a Muslim. It is also unique because later they developed an antipathy towards the representation of living being in art and craft. Abd al-Malik's reform of coinage was linked with his reorganization of state finances. It proved so successful that for hundreds of years, coins were struck according to the pattern and weight of the third specimen. Take a look at this image. The Great Mosque of Al-Mutawakkil in Samra, the second Abbasid capital, built in 850. The minar is 50 meter high and is made of brick. Inspired by Mesopotamian architectural traditions, this was the largest mosque in the world for centuries. The Abbasid Revolution. For their success in centralization the Muslim polity, the Umayyads paid a heavy price. A well-organized movement called Dawa brought down the Umayyads and replaced them with another family of Mecca origin, the Abbasids. In 750, the Abbasids portrayed the Umayyad regime is evil and promised a restoration of the original Islam of the Prophet. The revolution led not only to a change of dynasty but changes in the political structure and culture of Islam. The Abbasid uprising broke out in the distant region of Khorasan, eastern Iran. A 20-day journey from Damascus on a fast horse, Khorasan had a mixed Arab-Iranian population which could be mobilized for various reasons. The Arab soldiers here were mostly from Iraq and resented the dominance of the Syrians. The civilian Arabs of Khorasan disliked the Umayyad regime for having made promises of tax concessions and privileges which were never fulfilled. As for the Iranian Muslims, Mawali, they were exposed to the scorn of the race-conscious Arab and were eager to join any campaign to oust the Umayyads. The Abbasids, descendants of Abbas, the Prophet's uncle, mustered the support of the various distant groups and legitimized their bid for power by promising that Mishai Mahdi from the family of the Prophet Ahlal Bait would liberate them from the oppressive Umayyad regime. Their army was led by an Iranian slave, Abu Muslim, who defeated the last Umayyad Caliph Marwan in a battle at the river Jab. Under Abbasid rule, Arab influence declined while the importance of Iranian culture increased. The Abbasids established their capital at Baghdad, near the ruins of the ancient Indian metropolis Ctesiphon. The army and bureaucracy were reorganized on a non-tribal basis to ensure greater participation by Iraq and Khorasan. The Abbasid rulers strengthened the religious status and functions of the caliphate and patronized Islamic institutions and scholars. But they were forced by the needs of government and empire to retain the centralized nature of the state. They maintained the magnificent imperial architecture and elaborate court ceremonials of the Umayyads. The regime, which took pride in having brought down the monarchy, found itself compelled to establish it again. Breakup of the Caliphate and the rise of Sultanates. The Abbasid state became weaker from the 9th century because Baghdad's control over the distant provinces declined, and because of conflict between pro-Arab and pro-Iranian factions in the army and bureaucracy. In 810, a civil war broke out between supporters of Amin and Mamun, sons of the Caliph Harun al-Rashid, which deepened the factionalism and created a new power bloc of Turkish slave officers, Mamulik. Schism once again competed with Sunni orthodoxy for power. A number of minor dynasties arose, such as the Tahirids and Samnids in Khorasan and Transoxian, Turan or lands beyond the Okhus, and the Sultanates in Egypt and Syria. Abbasid power was soon limited to central Iraq and western Iran. That too was lost in 945 when the Baids, a Shiite clan from the Caspian region of Iran, Daylam, captured Baghdad. The Buyid, the rulers assumed various titles, including the ancient Iranian title Shahanshah, King of Kings, but not that of Caliph. They kept the Abbasid Caliph as the symbolic head of their Sunni subjects. The decision not to abolish the Caliphate was a true one because under Shiite dynasty, the Fatimids had ambitions to rule the Islamic world. The Fatimids belonged to the Ismaili subsect of Shiism and claimed to be descendant from Prophet's daughter Fatima, and hence the sole rightful rulers of Islam. From their base in North Africa, they conquered Egypt in 969 and established the Fatimid Caliphate. The old capital of Egypt, first state, was replaced by a new city, Cairo, founded on the day of the rise of the planet Mars. Mirik, also called Al-Kahiri. The two rival dynasties patronized Shiite administrators, poets and scholars. Between 950 and 1200, Islamic society was held together not by a single political order or a single language of culture, Arabic, but by common economic and cultural patterns. Unity in the face of political divisions was maintained by the separation between state and society. The development of Persian as a language of Islamic high culture and the maturity of the dialogue between intellectual traditions, scholar, artist, and Merchants moved freely within the central Islamic lands and assured the circulation of ideas and manners. Some of these also percolated down to the level of villages due to conversion. The Muslim population less than 10% in the Umayyad and early Abbasid periods increased enormously. The identity of Islam as a religion and a culture system separate from other religions became much sharper, which made conversion possible and meaningful. A third ethnic group was added to the Arabs and Iranians with the rise of the Turkish Sultanates in the 10th and 11th century. The Turks were nomadic tribes from the Central Asian steppes grasslands of Turkestan northeast of the Aral Sea up to the borders of China, who gradually converted to Islam. See theme 5. They were skilled riders and warriors and entered the Abbasid, Samanid and Buyid administrations as slaves and soldiers, rising to high positions on account of their loyalty and military abilities. Activity 1. Identify the changing locations of the Caliphate's capital, which would you say was most centrally situated, rising to high positions on account of their loyalty and military abilities. The Ghaznavid Sultanate was established by Alptaghin 961 and consolidated by Muhammad of Ghazni 998 to 1030. Like the Buyids, the Ghaznavids were a military dynasty with a professional army of Turks and Indians. One of the generals of Muhammad was an Indian named Tilak, but their center of power was in Khorasan and Afghanistan, and for them the Abbasid caliphs were not rivals but a source of legitimacy. Muhammad was conscious of being the son of a slave and was especially eager to receive the title of Sultan from the Caliph. The Caliph was willing to support the Sunni Ghaznavid as a counterweight to Shiite power, an important person, Islamic center of learning and the birthplace of Umar Khayyam. The Seljuk Turks entered Turan as soldiers in the armies of the Samayans and Qarakhans, non-Muslim Turks from further east. They later established themselves as a powerful group under the leadership of two brothers, Tugril and Chagril Beg. Taking advantage of the chores following the death of Muhammad of Ghazni, the Seljukios conquered Kusrams in 1037 and made Nishapur their first capital. The Seljuks next turned their attention to Western Persia and Iraq, ruled by the Buyids, and in 1055 restored Baghdad to Sunni rule. The Caliph al-Qaim conferred on Tugril Beg the title of Sultan in a move that marked the separation of religious and political authority. The two Seljuk brothers are ruled together in accordance with the tribal notion of rule by the family as a whole. Tugril 1064 was succeeded by his nephew Alp Arsalan. During Alp Arsalan's reign, the Seljuk Empire expanded to Anatolia, modern Turkey. From the 11th to the 13th century, there was a series of conflicts between European Christians and the Arab states. This is discussed below. Then, at the start of the 13th century, the Muslims world found itself on the verge of a great disaster. This was the threat from the Mongols, the last but most decisive of all nomadic assaults on settled civilization. See theme 5. The Crusades. In medieval Islamic societies, the Christians were regarded as the people of the book, all kitab, since they had their own scripture. The New Testament or Injil. Christians were granted safe conduct Aman while venturing into Muslim states as merchants, pilgrims, ambassadors and travelers. These territories also included those which were once held by the Byzantine Empire, notably the Holy Land of Palestine. Jerusalem was conquered by the Arabs in 638, but it was ever present in the Christian imagination as the place of Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection. This was an important factor in the formation of the image of Muslims in Christian Europe. Hostility towards the Muslim world became more pronounced in the 11th century. Normans, Hungarians, and some slaves had been converted to Christianity, and the Muslims alone remained as the main enemy. There was also a change in the social and economic organization of Western Europe in the 11th century, which contributed to the hostility between Christendom and the Islamic world. The clergy and the warrior class, the first two orders, see theme 6, were making efforts to ensure political stability as well as economic growth based on agriculture and trade. The possibilities of military confrontation between competing feudal principalities and a return to economic organization based on plunder were contained by the Peace of God movement. All military violences were forbidden inside certain areas near places of worship during certain periods considered sacred in the church calendars, and against certain vulnerable social groups such as churchmen and the common people. The peace of God deflected the aggressive tendencies of feudal society away from the Christian world and towards the enemies of God. It built a climate in which fighting against the infidels non-believers became not only permissible but also commendable. The death in 1092 of Malik Shah, the Seljuk Sultan of Baghdad, was followed by the disintegration of his empire. This offered the Byzantine Emperor Alexius I a chance to regain Asia Minor and northern Syria. For Pope Urban II, this was an opportunity to revive the spirit of Christianity. In 1095, the Pope joined the Byzantine Emperor in calling for a war in the name of God to liberate the Holy Land. Between 1095 and 1291, Western European Christians planned and fought wars against Muslim cities on the coastal plains of the eastern Mediterranean Levant. These wars were later designated as Crusades. The Pope ordered the ceremonial granting of crosses to those who had sworn to fight. Aleppo, a Hittite, Assyrian, and Hellenistic site which was occupied by the Arabs in 636. It was fought over for the next 1,000 years. Not the Crusaders seen in action, not all Matrix Itinerary 1534-36. In the First Crusade, 1098-99, soldiers from France and Italy captured Antioch in Syria and claimed Jerusalem. Their victory was accompanied by the slaughter of Muslims and Jews in the city, chronicled by both Christians and Muslims. Muslim writers refer to the arrival of the Christians called Ifringi or Frangi as a Frankish invasion. The Franks quickly established four Crusader states in the region of Syria, Palestine. Collectively, these territories were known as Outremer, the land overseas, and later Crusades were directed at its defense and expansion. The Outremer survived well for some time, but when the Turks captured Edessa in 1144, an appeal was made by the Pope for a second crusade. 1145-49, a combined German and French army made an attempt to capture Damascus, but they were defeated and forced to return home. After this, there was a gradual erosion of the strength of Outremer. Crusader zeal gave way to living in luxury and to battles over territory among the Christian rulers. Salah al-Din Saladin created an Egypt-Syrian empire and gave the call for jihad or holy war against the Christians and defeated them in 1187. He regained Jerusalem nearly a century, defeated them in nearly a century after the First Crusade. Records of the time indicate that Salah al-Din's treatment of the Christian population was humane, in marked contrast to the way in which Christians had earlier dealt with Muslims and Jews. Although he gave custody of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre to the Christians, a number of churches of the Holy Sepulchre to the Christians, a number of churches were turned into mosques, and Jerusalem once again became a Muslim city. The loss of the city prompted a third crusade in 1189, but the Crusaders gained little except for some coastal towns in Palestine and free access to Jerusalem for Christian pilgrims. The Mamluks, the rulers of Egypt, finally drove the crusading Christians from all of Palestine in 1291. Europe gradually lost military interest in Islam and focused on its internal political and cultural development. The Crusades left a lasting impact on two aspects of Christian Muslim relations. One of the harsher attitude of the Muslim state towards its Christian subjects, which resulted from the bitter memorial of the conflict, as well as the needs for security in areas of mixed population. The other was the greater influence of Italian mercantile communities from Pisa, Genoa, and Venice in the trade between the East and the West even after the restoration of Muslim power. Franks in Syria. Franks in Syria. The treatment of the subjugated Muslim population differed among the various Frankish lords. The earliest of the Crusaders who settled down in Syria and Palestine were generally more tolerant of the Muslim population than those who came later. In his memoirs, Usma ibn Munqidh, a 12th century Syrian Muslim, had something interesting to say about his new neighbors. Among the Franks, there are some who have settled down in this country and associated with Muslims. These are better than the newcomers, but they are expectations of the rule and no inference and can be drawn from them. Here is an example. Once I sent a man to Antioch on business. At that man, Chief Theodore Sophians, an Eastern Christian, was there, and he and I were friends. He was then all powerful in Antioch. One day he said to my man, one of my Frankish friends has invited me, come with me and see how they live. My man told me, so I went with him and we came to the house of one of the king knights. Those who had come with the first Frankish expedition, he had already retired from state and military service and had a property in Antioch from which he lived. He produced a fine table with food both tasty and cleanly served. He saw that I was reluctant to eat and said, eat your heart's content, for I do not eat Frankish food. I have Egyptian women cooks and eat nothing but what they prepare. Nor does swine flesh ever enter my house. So I ate but with some cautions and we took our leave. Later I was walking through the market when suddenly a Frankish woman caught hold of me and began jabbering in their language, and I could not understand what she was saying.
A crowd of Franks collected against me, and I was sure that my end had come. Then suddenly the same knight appeared and saw me, and came up to that woman and asked her, "What you want of this Muslim?" She replied, "He killed my brother Harso." This Harso was the knight of a family who had been killed by someone from the army of Hama. Then the knight shouted at her and said, "This man is a bourgeoisie. Borgias, that is a merchant. He does not fight or go to war." And she shouted at the crowd and they disappeared. Then he took my hand and went away. So the effect of that meal that I have had was to save me from death. Economy, agriculture, urbanization, and commerce. Agriculture was the principal occupation of the selected population in the newly conquered territories. The Islamic State made no changes in this land. Land was owned by big and small peasants, and in some cases by the state in Iraq and Iran, and existed in fairly large units cultivated by peasants. The estate owners collected taxes on behalf of the state during the Sasanian as well as Islamic periods in areas that had moved from a pastoral to a settled agricultural system. Land was the common property of the village. Finally, big estates that were abandoned by their owners from the Islamic conquest were acquired by the state and handed over mainly to the Muslim elites of the empire, particularly members of the Caliph's family. The state had overall control of agricultural lands, deriving the bulk of its income from land revenue once the conquest was over. The lands conquered by the Arabs that remained in the hands of the owners were subject to a tax, kharaj, which varied from half to a fifth of the produce, according to the conditions of cultivation on land held or cultivated by Muslims. The tax levied was one-tenth ushur of the produce. When non-Muslims started to convert to Islam to pay lower taxes, this reduced the income of the state. To address the shortfall, the caliphs first discouraged conversion and later adopted a uniform policy of taxation. From the 10th century onwards, the state authorized its officials to claim their salaries from agricultural revenues from territories called ikats revenue assignments. Agricultural prosperity went hand in hand with political stability in many areas, especially in the Nile Valley. The state supported irrigation system, the construction of dams and canals, and the digging of wells, often equipped with water wheels or noria, all of which were crucial for good harvests. Islamic law gave tax connections to people who brought land under cultivation. Through peasant individuals, the state support cultivable land expanded and productivity rose. Even in the absence of major technical changes, many new crops such as cotton, oranges, bananas, watermelons, spinach, and brinjals, badinjan, were grown and even exported to Europe. Take a look at this illustration. Grain harvesting, the laborer's lunch is being brought on a tray. Arabic version of the pseudo Galen's book of Antidotes, 1199. See the story of Dr. Galen, page 63. Take a look at this illustration. A Crusader castle in Syria, built during the Crusades, Levanten, it was an important base to attack Arab controlled areas. The towers and aqueducts were built by the Mamluk Sultan Baybars when he captured it in 1271. Take a look at this illustration. A boat sailing to Basra, the crew are Indian and the passengers Arab. The transport of goods and passengers by water was cheaper, quicker, and safe in pre-modern times. Illustration from the Makmat written by Hariri 12th century manuscript. The Makmat assemblies were a genre of popular Arabic literature in which a narrator tells stories of a trickster and his escapades. Islamic civilization flourished as the number of cities grew phenomenally. Many new cities were founded mainly to settle Arab soldiers, gen who formed the backbone of the local administration. Among this class of garrison cities called Misr, the Arabic name for Egypt, were Kufa and Basra in Iraq, and Fusat and Cairo in Egypt within half a century of its establishment as the capital of the Abbasid Caliphate. 800. The population of Baghdad had reached around 1 million. Alongside these cities were older towns such as Damascus, Isfahan, and Samarkand, which received a new lease of life. Their size and population surged, supported by an expansion in the production of food grains and raw materials such as cotton and sugar for urban manufactures. A vast urban network developed, linking one town with another and forming a circuit. At the heart of the cities were two buildings complexes radiating cultural and economic power. The congregational mosque, Masjid al Jami, big enough to seem from a distance, and the central marketplace, souk with shops in row, merchants loading Fanduk, and the officer of the money changer. The cities were homes to administrators, iron or eyes of the state, and scholars and merchants, Tujar, who lived close to the center. Ordinary citizens and soldiers and had their living quarters in the outer circle, each fitted with its own mosque, church of Sachor, Sangyok, Jewish temple, subsidiary market, and public bath, Hammam. An important meeting place. At the outskirts were the house of the urban poor, a market for green vegetables and fruits brought from the countryside, caravan stations, and unclean shops such as those dealing in tanning or butchering. Beyond and city walls were inns for people to rest when the city gates were shut, and cemeteries. There were variations on this typology depending on the nature of the landscape, political traditions, and historical events. Political unification and urban demand for foodstuffs and luxuries enlarged the circuit of exchange. Geography favored the Muslim Empire. It spread between the trading zones of the Indian Ocean and the Mediterranean. For 5 centuries, Arab and Iranian traders monopolized the maritime trade between China, India, and Europe. This trade passed through two major routes, namely the Red Sea and the Persian Gulf. High value goods suitable for long distance trade, such as the spices, textile, pro- porcelain, and gunpowder, were shipped from India and China to the Red Sea ports of Aden and Aidhab and the Gulf ports of Siraf and Basra. From here, the merchandise was carried overland in camel caravans to the warehouses. Makhajin, origin of the word magazine, which has a similar collection of articles of Baghdad, Damascus, and Aleppo for local consumption or onward transmission. The caravans passing through Mecca got bigger whenever the highs coincided with the sailing seasons. Mavism, origin of the word monsoon in the Indian Ocean at the Mediterranean end of these trade routes. Exports to Europe from the port of Alexandria were handled by Jewish merchants, some of whom traded directly with India as can be seen from their letters preserved in the Ghaznavid collection. However, from the 10th century, the Red Sea route gained greater importance due to the rise of Cairo as a center of commerce and power and growing demand for eastern goods from the trading cities of Italy. Activity to describe him, morning scene in Basra. Paper, Geniza records and history. In the central Islamic lands, written works were widely circulated after the introduction of paper. Paper made from linen came from China, where the manufacturing process was a closely guarded secret. In 751, the Muslim governor of Samarkand took 20,000 Chinese invaders as prisoners, some of whom were caught at making paper. For the next 100 years, Samarkand paper remained an important export item. Since Islam prohibited monopolies, paper began to be manufactured in the rest of the Islamic world. By the middle of the 10th century, it had more or less replaced papyrus, the writing material made from the inner stem of a plant that grew freely in the Nile Valley. Demand for paper increased, and Abad al Latif, a doctor from Baghdad, see his depiction of the ideal student on page 98, and a resident of Egypt between 1193 and 1207 reported how Egyptian peasants robbed graves to obtain mummy wrappings made of linen to sell to paper factories. Paper also facilitated the writing of commercial and personal documents of all kinds. In 1896, a huge collection of medieval Jewish documents was discovered in the sealed room Genicha, pronounced Ghanija, of the Ben Ezra Synagogue in First State. The documents had been preserved thanks to the Jewish practice of not destroying any piece of writing that contained the name of God. The Genza was found to contain over a quarter of a million manuscripts and fragments dating back as far as the mid 8th century. Most of the material dated from 10th to 13th centuries, that is, from the Fatimid, Ayyubid, and early Mamluk periods. These included personal letters between merchants, family, and friends, contracts, promises of dowry, sale documents, laundry lists, and other trivia. Most of the documents were written in Judaic Arabic, a version of Arabic written in Hebrew characters that was commonly used by Jewish communities throughout the medieval Mediterranean. The Geniza documents provide rich insights into personal and economic experiences as also into Mediterranean and Islamic culture. The documents also suggest that the business skills and commercial techniques of merchants of the medieval Islamic world were more advanced than those of their European counterparts. Gautier wrote a multi-volume history of the Mediterranean from Geniza records, and Amitav Ghosh was inspired by him. Geniza later to tell the story of an Indian slave in his book in an antique land. Towards the eastern end, caravans of Iranian merchants set out from Baghdad along the Silk Road to China via the, the oasis cities of Bukhara and Samarkand, Transoxiana, to bring Central Asian and Chinese goods, including paper. Transoxiana also formed an important link in the commercial network which extended north to Russia and Scandinavia for the exchange of European goods, mainly fur and Slavic captives. Hence, the word slave, Islamic coins used for the payment of these goods were found in hoards discovered along the Volga River and in the Baltic region. Male and female Turkish slaves, Ghulam too, were purchased in these markets for the courts of the caliphs and sultans. The official system, income and expenditure of the state and market exchange increased the importance of money in the central Islamic lands. Coins of gold, silver, and copper Fululs were minted and circulated, often in bags sealed by money changers to pay for goods and services. Gold came from Africa, Sudan, and silver from Central Asia, Jarfashan Valley. Precious metals and coins also came from Europe, which used these to pay for its trade with the East. Rising demand for money forced people to release their accumulated reserves and idle wealth into circulations. Credit combined with currencies to oil the wheels of commerce, the greatest contribution of the Muslim world to medieval economic life was the development of superior methods of payment and business organization. Letters of credit, sack, origin of the word, check, and bills of exchange, suftaza, were used by merchants and bankers to transfer money from one place or individual to another. The widespread use of commercial papers freed merchants from the need to carry cash everywhere and also made their journeys safer. The Caliph too used the sack to pay salaries or reward poets and minstrels. Although it was customary for merchants to set up a family business or employ slaves to run their affairs, formal business arrangements Majarba were also common, in which sleeping partners entrusted capital to traveling merchants and shared profits and losses in an agreed proportion. Islam did not stop people from making money so long as certain prohibitions were respected. For instance, bearing transactions, riba were unlawful, although people circumvented Asri in ingenious ways in other while discussing the interest as a commission on currency exchange, the origin of the bill of exchange. Many tales from the Thousand and One Nights Aleph Laila Laila give us a picture of a medieval Islamic society featuring characters such as sailors, slaves, merchants, and money changers. Learning and culture. Take a look at this illustration. Courtyard of Mustan Syria Madrasa of Baghdad, founded in 1233. The madrasa was a college of learning for students who had finished their schooling in Maktab. Madrasas were attached to mosques, but big madrasa had a mosque attached to them. As the religious and social experience of the Muslims depended through contact with other people, the community was obligated to reflect on itself and confront issues pertaining to God and the world. What should be the ideal conduct of a Muslim in public and private? What is the object of creation and how does one know what God wants from his creatures? How can one understand the mysteries of the universe? Answers to such questions come from learned Muslims who acquired and organized knowledge of different kinds of strengthen the social identity of the community as well as to satisfy their intellectual curiosity. For religious scholars, ulma, knowledge, ilm derived from the Quran and the model behavior of the Prophet Sunnah was the only way to know the will of God and provide guidance in this world. The ulama in medieval times devoted themselves to writing tafsir and documenting Muhammad's authentic hadith. Some went on to prepare a body of laws or sharia, the straight path to govern the relationship of Muslim with God through rituals, ibadat, and with the rest of the humanity through social affairs, mumalat in framing Islamic law. Jurists also made use of reasoning qiyas since not everything was apparent in the Quran or hadith. The life had become increasingly complex with urbanization differences in the interpretation of the sources and method of jurisprudence led to the information of four schools of law, mazhab in the 8th and 9th centuries. These were the Malki, Hanfi, Shafi, and Hanbali schools, each named after a leading jurist. The last being the most conservative, the Sharia provided guidance on all possible legal issues within Sunni society, though it was more precise on questions of personal status, marriage, divorce, and inheritance than on commercial matters or penal and constitutional issues. The Quran. And if all the trees on the earth were ponds and the ocean were ink with seven oceans behind it to add to its supply, it would not the works of Allah be existed in the writing page from a Quran written or well in the 9th century. It is the beginning of Surah 18 Al Kafum, the cave which refers to Moses, the seven slippers of Ephesus and Alexander. Jelkar 9, the angular Kufi script has vowel signs in red for the correct pronunciation of the language. The Quran is a book in Arabic divided into 114 chapters, surahs, and arranged in descending order of length, the shortest being the lowest. The only expectation to this is the first surah, which is a short prayer, all faitha or opening. According to Muslim tradition, the Quran is a collection of messages, revelations which God sent to the Prophet Muhammad between 610 and 632, first in Mecca and then in Medina. The task of compiling these revelations was completed sometime in 650. The oldest complete Quran we have today dates from the 9th century. There are many fragments which are older, and earliest being the verses engraved on the dome of the rock and on coins in the 7th century. The use of the Quran as a source material for the history of early Islam has posed some problems. The first is that it is a scripture, a text vested with religious authority. Theologians generally believed that as the speech of God, Kalam Allah. It has to be understood literally, but rationalists among them gave wider interpretations to the Quran. In 833, the Abbasid Caliph al Mamun imposed the view in a trial of faith or Mihna, that the Quran is God's creation rather than his speech. The second problem is that the Quran very often speaks in metaphors, and unlike the Old Testament, Tawrit, it does not narrate events but only refers to them. Medieval Islamic scholars thus had to make sense of many verses with the help of hadith. Many hadith were written to help the reading of the Quran. Take a look at this illustration painting of Whirling Dervishes Iranian manuscript 1490 of the four-man dancing. Only one is shown with his hands in the correct position. Somehow succumbed to vertigo and are being led away. Before it took its final form, the Sharia was adjusted to take into account the customary laws, uruf of the various religions, as well as the law of the state on political and social order. Siyasa, Sharia customary laws, however, retained their strength in large parts of the countryside and continued to bypass the Sharia in matters such as the inheritance of land by doctors. In most regions, the ruler or his official dealt routinely with matters of state secretly and sent only selected cases to the Ghazi judge. The Ghazi, appointed by the state in each city or locality, often acted as an arbitrate in disputes rather than as a strict enforcer of the Sharia. A group of religious minded people in medieval Islam, known as Sufis, sought a deeper and more personal knowledge of God through asceticism, Rahbaniya, and mysticism. The more society gave itself up to material pursuits or pleasures, the more the Sufis sought to renounce the world, Jude, and rely on God alone. Tawakkul. In the 8th and ninth centuries, ascetic inclinations were elevated to the higher stage of mysticism, tasawwuf by the ideas of pantheism and love. Pantheism is the idea of oneness of God and His creation, which implies that the human soul must be united with its Maker. Unity with God can be achieved through an intense love for God. Ishq, which the woman Saint Rabia of Basra, 891, preached in her poems. Byzid Bistami, 874, an Iranian Sufi, was the first to teach the importance of submerging the self-fana in God. Sufis used musical concerts, sama, to induce ecstasy and stimulate emotions of love and passion. Sufism is open to all regardless of religious affiliation, status, and gender. Dulnan Misri, 861, whose grave can still be seen near the pyramids in Egypt, declared before the Abbasid Caliph al Mutawakil that he learnt true Islam from an old woman and true chivalry from a water carrier. By making religious more personal and less institutional, Sufism gained popularity and posed a challenge to Orthodox Islam. An alternative vision of God and the universe was developed by Islamic philosophers and scientists under the influence of Greek philosophy and science. During the 7th century, remnants of late Greek culture could still be found in the Byzantine and Sasanian empires, although they were slowly dying in the scholars of Alexandria, Syria, and Mesopotamia. Once part of Alexander's empire, Greek philosophy, mathematics and medicine were taught along with other subjects. The Umayyad and Abbasid caliphs commissioned the translation of Greek and Syriac books into Arabic by Christian scholars. Translation became a well organized activity under Al Mamun, who supported the library come Institute of Science, but all Hikmah in Baghdad, where the scholars worked. The works of Aristotle, the elements of Euclid and Ptolemy's Almagest were brought to the attention of Arabic reading scholars. Indian works on astronomy, mathematicians, and medicine were also translated into Arabic during the same period. These works reached Europe and kindled interest in philosophy and science. Activity 3. Comment on this passage. Would it be relevant to a student today? The ideal student. Abd al Latif, a 12th century legal and medical scholar of Baghdad, talks to his ideal student. I command you not to learn your sciences from books unaided, even though you may trust your ability to understand. Resort to teachers for each science you seek to acquire, and should your teacher be limited in his knowledge, take all that he can offer until you find another more accomplished than he. You must venerate and respect him. When you read a book, make every effort to learn it by heart and master its meaning. Imagine the book you to have disappeared and that you can dispense with it. Unaffected by its loss, one should read histories, study biographies, and the experiences of nations. By doing this, I will be as though in his short life space he lived contemporaneously with the peoples of the past, was on intimate terms with them, and knew the good and bad among them. You should model your conduct on that of the early Muslims. Therefore, read the biography of the Prophet and follow in his footsteps. You should frequently distrust your nature rather than have a good opinion of it. Submitting your thoughts to men of learning and their works, proceeding with caution and avoiding haste. He who has not endured the stress of study will not taste the joy of knowledge. When you have finished your study and reflection, occupy your tongue with the mention of God's name and sing his praises. Do not complain if the world turns it back on you. Know that learning leaves a trail and a self proclaiming in its possessor a ray of light and brightness shining on him, pointing him out. Ahmad ibn al Qasim ibn Abi Usyabia, Uyin al Anba. The study of new students promoted critical inquiry and had a profound influence on Islamic intellectual life. Scholars with a theological bent of mind, such as the group known as Mutazila, used Greek logic and methods of reasoning kalam to defend Islamic beliefs. Philosophers of Falasifa posed wider questions and provided fresh answers. Ibn Sina, 1980 1037, a doctor by profession and a philosopher, did not believe in the resurrection of the body on the day of judgment. This was met with strong opposition from theologians. His medical writings were widely read. The most influential was Al Quanam fil Tib, Canon of Medicine, a million word manuscript that lists 760 drugs sold by the pharmacist of this day and includes notes on his own experiments conducted in hospitals. Bimarston, the canon points out the importance of deities healing through dietary regulation, the influence of the climate and environment on health, and the contagious nature of some diseases. The canon was used as a textbook in Europe, where the author was known as Avicenna. Theme 7. Just before his death, the scientist and poet Umar Khayyam was said to be reading the canon. His gold toothpick was found between two pages of the chapter on metaphysics. In medieval Islamic societies, fine language and a creative imagination were among the most appreciated qualities in a person. These qualities raised a person's communication to the level of adab and term which implied literally and cultural refinement. Other forms of expression include poetry, nazm or orderly arrangement, and prose, nathar or scattered words which were meant to be memorized and used when the occasion arose. The most popular poetic composition of pre-Islamic origin was the Odi Qasida, developed by poets of the Abbasid period to glorify the achievements of their patrons. Poets of Persian origin revitalized and reinvented Arabic poetry and challenged the cultural hegemony of the Arabs. Abu Nuwas, 815, who was of Persian origin, broke new ground by composing classical poetry on new themes such as wine and male love with the intention of celebrating pleasures forbidden by Islam. After Abu Nuwas, the poet addresses the object of their passion in the masculine, even if the latter was a woman. Following the same tradition, the Sufis glorified the intoxication caused by the wine of mystical love. By the time the Arabs conquered Iran, Pahlavi, the language of the sacred books of ancient Iran, was in decay. A version of Pahlavi known as New Persian, with a huge Arabic vocabulary, soon developed. The formation of sultanates in Khorasan and Traxozina took a New Persian to great culture heights. The Samanid court poet Rudki 940 was considered the father of New Persian poetry, which included new forms such as the short lyrical poem ghazal and the quartet rubai, plural rubaiyat. The rubai is a four-line stanza in which the first two lines set the stage, the third is finally poised, and the fourth delivers the point. In contrast to its form, the subject matter of the rubai is unrestricted. It can be used to express the beauty of a beloved, praise a patron, or express the thoughts of the philosopher. The rubai reaches its zenith in the hands of Umar Khayyam 1048 to 1131, also an astronomer and mathematician who lived at various times in Bukhara, Samarkand, and Isfahan. Take a look at this illustration. Dimna is talking to the lion Asad in this miniature painting of a 13th century Arabic manuscript. In Bukhara, Samarkand, as Isfahan, at the beginning of 11th century, Ghazni became the center of Persian literature life. Poets were naturally attracted by the brilliance of the imperial court rulers to realize the importance of patronizing arts and learning for enhancing their prestige. Muhammad of Ghazni gathered around him a group of poets who composed anthologies, divans, and epic poetry. Matnavi, the most outstanding, was Firdausi 1020, who took 30 years to complete the Shahnama, Book of Kings, an epic of 50,000 couplets, which has become a masterpiece of Islamic literature. The Shahnama is a collection of traditions and legends, the most popular being that of Rustam, which poetically depicts Iran from creation up until the Arab conquest. It was in keeping with the Ghaznavid tradition that Persian later became the language of administration and culture in India. The catalogue Kitab al Fihrist of a Baghdad bookseller Ibn Nadim 895 describes a large number of works written in prose for the moral education and amusement of readers. The oldest of these is a collection of animals fables called Kalila wa Dimna, the names of the two jackals who were the leading characters, which is the Arabic translation of a Pahlavi version of the Panchatantra. The most widespread and lasting literary works are the stories of hero adventures such as Alexander or Iskandra and Sindbad, or those of unhappy lovers such as who is known as Majnun or the Madman. These have developed over the centuries into oral and written traditions. The Thousands and One Nights is another collection of stories told by a single narrator, Sharajat, to her husband night after night. The collection was originally in Indo-Persian and was translated into Arabic in Baghdad in the 8th century. Most stories were later added in Cairo during the Mamluk period. The stories depict human beings of different types of the generous, the stupid, the gullible, the crafty, and were told to educate and entertain. In his Kitab al Bukhala, Book of Mistress Jahin of Basra, 868, collected amusing anecdotes about mistress and also analyzed greed. From the 9th century onwards, the scope of adab was expanded to include biographies, manuals of ethics, clock mirrors for princess, books on statecraft, and above all history, Tariq and geography. The tradition of history writing was well established in literature Muslim societies. History books were read by scholars and students as well as by the broader literate public. For rulers and officials, history provided a good record of the glories and achievements of a dynasty as well as examples of the techniques of administration. In the two major historical works, Ansab al Ashraf, Genealogy of the Nobles of Bal- Baldhuri 892, and Tariq al Russell wal Muluk, History of Prophets and Kings of Tabari. The whole of human history was treated with the Islamic period as the focal point. The tradition of local history writing developed with the breakup of the Caliphate. Books were written in Persian about dynasties, cities, or regions to explore the unity and variety of the world of Islam. Geography and travel. Rihla constituted a special branch of adab. This combined knowledge from Greek, Iranian, and Indian books with the observation of merchants and travelers in mathematical geography. The inhabited world was divided into seven climes, singular eclipse parallel with the equator corresponding to our three continents. The exact position of each city was determined astronomically. Mukathasis, thousand descriptive geography. Ashan all Twackism, the best divisions, is a comparative study of the countries and peoples of the world and a treasure trove of exotic curiosities. Geography and general history were combined in Muraz al Dahab, Golden Meadows of Masudi, written in 943 to illustrate the wide variety of world cultures. Al Banun is famous. Tahqiqma Lil Hind, History of India, was the greatest attempt by an 11th century Muslims right to look beyond the world of Islam and observe what was of value in another cultural tradition. Take a look at this illustration. Mosaic floor in the bath house of the palace at Kirbat al Mafjar, Palestine, 8th century. Imagine the caliph enthroned on the tree. The scene below depicts peace and war. By the 10th century, as Islamic world had emerged, which was easily recognizable by travelers, religious buildings were the greatest external symbols of the world. Mosques, shrines, and tombs from Spain to Central Asia showed the same basic design: arches, domes, minarets, and open courtyards, and expressed the spiritual and practical needs of Muslims in the first Islamic century. The mosque acquired a distinct architecture form, roof supported by pillars, which transcended regional variations. The mosque had an open courtyard, shown where a fountain or pond was placed, leading to a vaulted hall which could accommodate long lines of worshippers and the prayer leader imam. Two special features were located inside the hall: a niche mihrabi in the wall indicating the direction of a Mecca Qibla, and a public minbar pronounced mimbar, from where sermons were delivered during known prayers on Friday. Attached to a building was the minaret, a tower used to call the faithful to prayer at the appointed times and to symbolize the presence of the new faith. Time was marked in cities and villages by the five daily prayers and weekly sermons. Take a look at this illustration. The Islamic decorative genius found full expression in the art of metal objects that are among the best preserved specimens. This mosque lamp from 14th century Syria has the light words inscribed on it: God is the light, nur of the heavens and the earth. His light is like a ninch miskat with a lamp mishbah. The lamp is in a glass which looks as if it were a glittering star kindled from a blessed olive. Jaitan tree that is neither eastern nor western, whose oil would always shine even if no fire nor touched it. Quran chapter 24 verse 35. The same pattern of construction of buildings built around a central courtyard, Ivan, appear not only in mosques and Muslims but also in caravannarias, hospitals, and palaces. The Umayyad built desert palaces in oases such as Kirbat al Mafjar in Palestine and Qusar Amr in Jordan, which served as luxurious residences and retreats for hunting and pleasure. The palaces, modeled on Roman and Sasanian architecture, were lavishly decorated with sculptures, mosaics, and paintings of people. The Abbasids built a new imperial city in Samarra amidst the garden and running waters, which is mentioned in the stories and legends revolving around Harun al Rashid. The great palaces of the Abbasid caliphs in Baghdad or the Fatimids in Cairo have disappeared, leaving only traces in literary texts. The rejection of representing living being in the religious art of Islam promoted two art forms: calligraphy, khattati, or the art of beautiful writing, and Audiobook, geometric and vegetal designs, small and big inscriptions, usually of religious quotations, were used to decorate architecture. Calligraph art has been best preserved in manuscripts of the Quran dating from the 8th and 9th centuries, literary works such as the Kitab al Aghani, Book of Songs, Khalilwa Dimna, and Makmat of Harir were illustrated with miniature paintings. In addition, a wide variety of illumination techniques were introduced to enhance the beauty of a book. Plant and floral designs based on the idea of the garden were used in buildings and book illustration. The history of the Central Islamic lands bring together the important aspects of human civilization, religion, community, and politics. We can see them as three circles which merge and appears as one in the 7th century. In the next 5 centuries, the circles separate. Towards the end of our period, the influence of Islam over state and government was minimal, and politics involved many things which have no sanction in religion, kingship, civil wars, etc. The circles of religion and community overlapped. The Muslim community was united in its observance of the Sharia in rituals and personal matters. It was no more governing itself. Political was a separate circle, but it was defining its religious identity. The only way the circles of religion and community could have separated was through the progressive secularization of Muslim society. Philosophers and Sufis advocate this, suggesting that civil society should be made autonomous and rituals be replaced by private spirituality. Activity 4. Which of the pictures in the chapter do you like best and why? 595. Muhammad marries Khadija, a wealthy Meccan trader who later supports Islam. 610 to 12. Muhammad had first public preaching of Islam. 612. 621. First agreement at Aqaba with Medinan converts. 622. Migration from Mecca at Medina. Arab tribes of Medina answer shelter Meccan migrants. Muhajir. 632 to 61. Early Caliphate, conquest of Syria, Iraq, Iran, and Egypt, civil wars. 661 to 750. Umayyad rule, Damascus becomes the capital. 750 to 945. Abbasid rule, Baghdad becomes the capital. 945. Bayez captured Baghdad, the literary and cultural efflorescences. 1063 to 92. Rule of Nizam al Mulk, the powerful Saljuk wazir who established him string of madrasas called Nijmiya killed by Hasisian assistant assassins 1095 to 1291. Crusades contacts between Muslims and Christians. 1111 Death of Ghazali, influential Iranian scholar who opposed rationalism. 1258 Mongols captured Baghdad's exercises. Answer in brief. Question number 1. What were the features of the lives of the Babylonians in the early 7th century? Question number 2. What is meant by the term Abbasid Revolution? Question number 3. Give examples of the cosmopolitan character of the states set up by Arabs, Iranians, and Turks. Question number 4. What were the effects of the Crusades on Europe and Asia? Answer in a short essay. Question number 5. How were Islamic architectural forms different from those of the Roman Empire? Question number 6. Describe a journey from Samarkand to Damascus referring to the cities on the route. Thank you.